I think what's important to keep in mind is you can't really just take the first few cases and see how those verdicts are read and how much payment the firms are on the hook for, and then take that cost times all the outstanding cases, because that is just going to lead to a very high number, a number that's really not very likely at all to get reached to. But what is more likely is you'll see these cases litigated one by one over a long period of time, where the companies really try to wear down the different plaintiffs and at the end of the day usually settle for a much, much smaller amount than what the market capitalization in this case was lost by J&J back in December. At a much smaller amount will likely be what would be settled for J&J.
So when you're saying that if you took the big settlement and you sort of extrapolated that, that would be unrealistic, you're talking, I assume, about the 2018 verdict where they were required to pay about $4.7 billion to 22 women and their families. Why is it unrealistic that plaintiffs won't see that case and say, you know what, I can do that, so I'm going to just dig my heels in and wait?
Well, I think there's a couple pieces to that question. One, I think it is realistic to see this great award and have anybody who has any sort of relationship with talcum powder and any sort of cancer to try to litigate against Johnson & Johnson. But what I think is unrealistic is that what you're going to see is all these cases have a high degree of validity and get these very high awards. Typically what happens is a lot of times plaintiffs look for the cases that are going to have the strongest case against these companies, start with those, with the realization that a lot of the other cases are much more ambiguous, and that at the end of the day, when you do move closer towards settlement, the overall number is much, much lower than what it might seem at first.
Johnson & Johnson has claimed just over and over again that the product is safe, that the evidence is on their side. Are they right?
Well, this is one of the cases where I think when you look at the data over the last, several decades, it looks pretty clean. It's trickier as you go further back in time, and I think that's when there's a bit more ambiguity. What I would think is going to be very likely what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of these cases, again, go down this pathway of litigating out again and again, but it's going to be a very slow process that I think J&J is going to control. And when we look at past events, when we think about the metal-on-metal hip recall that J&J was on the hook for a lot of costs, that really got settled for something in the low single-digit billions, something that was very manageable for J&J to the point where the stock really didn't even respond. However, in this case, when we're seeing these massive payouts right away, the stock is responding, and on those major gaps down, we think it's a great opportunity to buy the stock.
Damien, how are you looking at J&J's potential risks in the opioid space? It, of course, was left as that sole defendant in Oklahoma. A judge is expected to decide, really, I'm hearing any day over the next few weeks about that case. And, of course, J&J could be a party to this big case that a judge is pushing toward a settlement in Cleveland. What's your expectation first on that Oklahoma case?
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on here. So with Oklahoma, it's kind of a barometer for the rest of the country. It's got, some similarities and differences to other states, but it's somewhat of a barometer. And what is true for J&J is they have much less exposure to opioids in the branded product segment than a lot of these other folks who have already settled. So I think they have much less exposure, and in certain cases, their opioid products are more controlled release, so probably less apt to cause abuse in the same cases that some of the other more raw forms of the opioid drug. So we think when we look at J&J, it's important to think of them a little bit differently than some of the other opioid makers. Still probably at risk for some payout there, but probably not to the same magnitude of some of the other folks that have gone before it, like Purdue and Teva.